Close your eyes and picture the world centuries ago tonight. We'll bring those distant moments back to life, offering a soothing retreat from today's bustle. You're on the Mongolian steppe where the grass whispers to the wind and the sky feels like it's pressing down on the edges of the world. There are no fences here, no skyscrapers, no city noise, only the rumble of distant hooves and the cry of a lone falcon circling above. It smells of firewood smoke and wet horsehair, and you feel like you've stepped onto the edge of something ancient and vast. There's a chill in the air, the kind that makes you grateful for the layers of wool wrapped around you, and for the flickering fire inside the circular yurt you're crawling into. Life out here is raw and rhythmic. You eat when there's food, you sleep when there's peace, and you ride when there's war or when your uncle asks you to deliver a sheep, which might be worse. Of course, if you were born out here in the 12th century, your odds of surviving past childhood aren't great. Between wild wolves, rival clans, and possibly choking on a dumpling made of fermented mare's milk, your bedtime isn't guaranteed. But hey, at least there are no traffic jams. Before you fully sink into your pillow, a quick like and subscribe would mean the world. If you're into sleepy stories like this, got a strange bit of history you want to hear before bed, drop it in the comments. Tuck yourself in, slow your breathing, and let the past keep you company tonight. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squat beside a weathered shepherd as he points across the rolling plain, past the grazing horses toward the hazy horizon. Over there, he says, was where the boy found the blood clot. You blink. A blood clot. He nods solemnly, then takes a sip of his warm, milky tea and leans into the story like it's part of his bones. And just like that, we're off. Before he became a name that made empires tremble, Genghis Khan was a child named Temujin, born near the Onon River around 1162. There were no birth certificates, no gold-trimmed cradles, just a hard-packed floor, and the smell of animals. According to one slightly unnerving legend, he was born gripping a blood clot in his fist. That's not usually a good sign unless you're in a culture that believes it means destiny has decided to give you a sword before you've even learned to blink. His father Yasuge was a tribal chief, well-respected, good at raiding, and unfortunately not great at staying alive. When Temujin was around 9, Yasuge was poisoned by a rival clan. Just like that, his family went from tribal royalty to abandoned outcasts faster than you can say steppe politics. They were kicked out of their camp, left to forage for roots and rodents, and possibly regret not being born into a less drama-prone dynasty. You young and observant watch Temujin scavenge along the riverbanks. His mother Holin is fierce and unshakable, feeding her children whatever she can find, which might include wild onions, fish guts, and on one occasion, the family's own horse. They survive somehow, but something is growing inside the boy. A hunger, maybe. Or a list of names he plans to settle scores with later. This is no soft fairy tale. Temujin's brother Bektar tries to assert dominance, bad idea. Temujin, probably around age 14, kills him. That's one way to handle sibling rivalry, and historians still argue whether this act was cold-blooded ambition or raw survival instinct in a cutthroat world. That's the thing about Mongol society, it doesn't run on gold or bloodlines. It runs on strength, loyalty, and the ability to stay upright on a horse during a snowstorm. You could rise fast if you had guts and fall faster if you trusted the wrong cousin. The clans around you fight constantly, steal each other's herds, kidnap brides, and occasionally pause to make fermented mare's milk and questionable cheese. Oh, and about that cheese. One 13th century visitor wrote that Mongol cheese was so dry you had to dip it in tea to even make it chewable. Legend has it that one traveler broke a tooth and still gave it 5 stars. Out on the plain, you hear drums in the distance, small rhythmic thuds like hooves or heartbeats. Temujin, now older, rides past you, His eyes are darker than the storm clouds brewing behind him. He's already begun forging alliances not through wealth or bloodlines, but through promises, charisma, and some very well-placed arrows. Among the customs of the steppe, you learn of Anda, the sacred blood brother bond. Temujin forms one with a boy named Jamuka. They grow up like brothers, share dreams of greatness, and eventually try to destroy each other in a series of betrayals worthy of a soap opera with horses. In the quiet of the yurt that night, wrapped in pelts and cradling a bowl of broth that smells suspiciously of goat. You wonder what it must have felt like to live, not knowing what the next dawn would bring. Would a rival clan arrive with blades drawn? Would your only ox wander off into the hills? Would your best friend turn into your worst enemy? It was a world without comfort, but it was also a world where one boy from an outcast family could become something bigger than anyone had ever imagined. That boy is still riding past you, past the wolves, past every limit the steppe had tried to impose on him. And as the fire dies down and the stars unfurl above you, close your eyes knowing the journey is only just beginning. You wake early to the squeal of a restless horse and the soft thud of hooves on frozen grass. Outside your tent, dawn stretches across the steppe like a slow yawn, pale pink bleeding into the gray of the night before. You wrap a rough wool shawl tighter around your shoulders and follow the tracks of boot prints leading toward campfires crackling back to life. Temujin is now in his late teens, and the boy with a blood clot in his hand is sharpening more than just arrows. Word spreads quiet and careful of his ambition. He's gathering loyal men, many of whom don't care about noble birth or tribe. They want something more dependable, like food, or revenge, or at least a leader who won't toss them aside after one bad raid. This is when you first meet Borte. Not formally, of course. You're hiding behind a wagon when Temujin's bride is chosen, gifted from a neighboring tribe in a rare act of peace. She's clever, calm-eyed, and sharp enough to understand that this marriage is both alliance and gamble. You watch them ride off together, two figures against the wind, and maybe you roll your eyes just a little, but it's kind of sweet. Or it would be if kidnappers weren't waiting in the bushes. Yes, she's abducted soon after. Temujin, very not pleased, teams up with allies and rescues her in a dramatic raid. Historians still argue whether Borta was pregnant with Temujin's child or someone else's when she returned. Either way, Temujin raised the child as his own. Mongol family dynamics never boring. Around this time, the boy becomes a man. He wins small battles, he loses others. He's betrayed, imprisoned, escapes, wins again. You get used to a rhythm of dust blood and rebuilding. Mongol warfare isn't about numbers, it's about knowing the land, reading the wind, and striking like a thunderclap when no one sees it coming. And apparently wearing trousers made of felt, which historians say helped prevent saddle sores and embarrassment during ambushes. Win-win. You hear of a curious law. Temujin begins to spread an early form of a code called the Yasa. No one ever writes it down, but the word travels. No stealing, no adultery. Show respect. If you spill blood without reason, you pay with your own. One quirky rule: always pick up anything dropped on the road. Imagine enforcing that today on a freeway shoulder. These rules start to bind his followers not by birth but by loyalty. That's the secret sauce, really. Temujin's genius isn't just military, it's psychological. He doesn't just conquer tribes, he dissolves the tribal system. He breaks noble families' grip on power. You rise by merit, not bloodline. Well, except his bloodline, which is now getting very busy creating children who will inherit the empire someday. But that's a problem for later. You trudge past a bonfire where captured enemies are quietly debating whether to switch sides. Temujin offers them a choice: join him and rise or don't, and be trampled by history's most terrifying cavalry. Most choose wisely, and even those who don't still marvel at the organization of his camp. 100 men report to a commander. 10 groups form 1,000. 10,000s make an army. It's math, but with swords and tents. One curious fact: you overhear Genghis Khan once promoted a cook to command. Why? Because he was smart, loyal, and had a great sense of direction. This is how you get the world's first merit-based military, and possibly the best-fed one. Temujin's old friend Jamuka re-enters the picture. You watch as former blood brothers become bitter rivals. At one point, Jamuka defeats Temujin and reportedly executes 70 young warriors by boiling them alive. You shiver. Not from the wind, just yikes. Historians still argue whether that story is true or just propaganda whispered across campfires to strengthen Temujin's image. But either way, revenge simmers. And boil it does. Temujin eventually defeats Jamuka. Rather than returning the boiling favor, he offers mercy. Jamuka refuses. He asks for a noble death, and he gets it. Sword to the spine. Quiet, clean, oddly respectful. You wonder if they exchanged a glance at the end, both remembering that time they threw rocks at sheep together. Childhood so fleeting. Now the Great Council is called the Hurultai. Tribes gather. Smoke coils above yurts. Drums beat like thunder. And in a moment charged with history, Temujin is declared Genghis Khan, universal ruler of the Mongols. You're standing there as he raises his hand, and the entire steppe falls silent. It's not just power he's been given, it's permission. Permission to turn the world on its head. One of the first things he does, he creates a mounted postal system. Yes, before he rides west to break empires, he builds an ancient FedEx with horses. Riders switch out fresh mounts at stations spaced a day's gallop apart. Messages fly across deserts and mountains faster than any kingdom's courier could imagine. Honestly, Amazon would be impressed. You lie back on a rolled-up saddle, the night air thick with anticipation. This is the moment before the storm. You can feel it in your bones the way Genghis Khan's mind is turning toward China, toward Persia, toward lands so rich and soft they've never seen a bowstring snap under tension. But for now, he's just a man beside a fire, a father, a husband, a steppe-born dreamer with an empire still waiting to unfold. Tomorrow, the world will begin to shake. Dawn doesn't creep. It punches the sky open like a war drum. You're already awake because in a Mongol military camp, there's no such thing as a lazy morning. Horses snort steam. Armor clinks faintly. The whole place hums with readiness even when war isn't on the agenda. Today, though, war is very much on the agenda. You mount your horse, not yours exactly, but no one's looking, and join the great tide moving westward. Genghis Khan, now solidly in charge of a unified Mongol nation, has set his gaze toward the Xia and Jin dynasties of China. Why? Because they're rich, disrespectful, and have cities so full of shiny things it makes your teeth ache just looking at them. Also, they tried to play politics and double-cross him. Big mistake. You ride through valleys that echo with hooves. The Mongol army is moving like a living beast organized in units of 10,000 and 10,000. It's not chaos, it's math. Brutal, unstoppable math. And every part of it runs on discipline and information. Remember those postal stations? They're now relaying enemy movements in near real time. Ancient data analytics powered by oats. Along the way, you spot an odd scene. Genghis has ordered his men to burn excess baggage. Why? Because speed wins. A lightly packed Mongol is a deadly Mongol. You sadly say goodbye to your favorite yak hide pillow. Comfort must be sacrificed for conquest. The siege of Zhengdu. Modern Beijing sticks with you. The Jin dynasty hides behind immense stone walls, confident in their size and strength. But Mongols don't do frontal assaults unless absolutely necessary. Instead, you watch engineers, yes, Mongols have. Engineers build siege machines, including Chinese-style catapults, and something resembling a flamethrower powered by grease-soaked animal fat. Historians still argue whether that last one was real or just terrifying battlefield gossip. When the city finally falls, it's brutal. But Genghis Khan doesn't raise everything. He installs order, taxes, governance, then moves on. You hear a strange rumor that he spared scholars and artisans but executed aristocrats. Why? Because smart people build empires. Aristocrats just complain about seating arrangements. At campfires, you overhear tales of psychological warfare. Mongols light 10 fires per soldier to trick scouts into thinking their numbers are tenfold. Sometimes they send fake deserters into enemy cities to sow panic. Sometimes they just disappear only to return when the defenders are half asleep. Every battle is part choreography, part mind game, and part meteorological gamble. Because Mongols love to attack with the wind at their back, it blows their arrows farther. It also dramatically flutters their cloaks. You try not to laugh too loudly when you hear this odd tidbit. Mongols supposedly drank horse blood on long rides to stay alive. Just a quick slice to the jugular, nothing fatal, and a sip of warm, iron-rich fuel. You've seen stranger trail mix recipes, but this one takes the prize. Still, not all is glorious. The Mongols suffer losses. One time, Genghis is nearly killed by an arrow. Historians still argue if it was during a raid on the Tanguts or the Khwarezm Empire. He recovers, but the brush with death seems to sharpen him. Or maybe it just adds to the legend. Either way, the empire pushes forward. Speaking of the Khwarezm Empire, wow, that goes south fast. Genghis sends a trade caravan westward. They're robbed and murdered. He sends diplomats. They're executed, so he sends an army. The Khwarezmians may regret their life choices. You're there when the Mongols take Bukhara. Genghis reportedly enters the mosque and tells the terrified crowd, "I am the punishment of God." If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. Hoof! That's one way to open a town hall meeting. But even there, he doesn't just loot and leave. He organizes. He uses local administrators. He collects taxes. He sets up a census. Yes, a census. Because how can you rule the world if you don't know who's in it? One quirky detail that sticks with you, Genghis Khan reportedly forbade the washing of clothes during thunderstorms. The belief was that washing angered the water spirits. Whether this was about spirituality or just battlefield laundry logistics is unclear. Either way, everyone stinks, but no one dares risk divine wrath for clean socks. Another tidbit: the Mongols valued falconry almost as much as war. You sometimes spot Genghis with a bird on his arm, silent and regal, scanning the horizon. It's hard not to wonder if that falcon knows just how many empires it's soaring over. You stop in a city reduced to rubble and hear children reciting poetry in Mongolian, Persian, and Chinese. The empire is already multilingual, already multi-ethnic, and already connected in ways no one expected. Trade routes are growing, ideas are traveling, and every step forward feels like history shifting under your boots. At night, the fires burn low and the sky splits with stars. You sit by a commander who's just been promoted for saving a comrade in battle. No noble blood, just bravery. And that's the thing, you can feel it. Genghis Khan isn't just building an empire of land, he's building one of loyalty, mobility, possibility, Okay, and some scorched earth tactics, sure. You drift to sleep with hoofbeats still echoing in your ears. Tomorrow you'll ride again. The world is growing smaller, faster, more connected, and you're riding at the center of it. You wake before dawn again, your blanket stiff with frost and your joints protesting. But that doesn't matter because today's destination is Samarkand, the jewel of Central Asia. A city so old, so famously beautiful, even the Mongols tread a little lighter as they approach. Well, metaphorically, your horse is still galloping like the windows at money. Samarkand doesn't surrender. Cities rarely do, especially the ones with stone walls, ornamental gardens, and a population convinced that their wealth can outlast your army. But Mongols don't wait. Siege towers go up. River water is diverted. And just when the city thinks it can handle the pressure, the Mongols pull off something sinister. They use prisoners of war from the previous city as walking shields. You don't want to look, but you do. Inside Samarkand, you expect desolation. Instead, Genghis orders scholars to be spared. Artisans are marched away with care. A librarian is carried out with more reverence than the city governor. Turns out Genghis Khan collects people like someone collects rare coins. If you're useful, if you know how to build bridges, heal wounds, read the stars, your life suddenly becomes very valuable. One strange scene sticks in your mind: a Mongol officer carefully rolling up a Persian carpet and tying it to his saddle like it's treasure, which in fairness it is. That rug alone might fund a cavalry unit for weeks. But today is not just about victory, it's about messaging. The Mongols are crafting a reputation, a whispered myth, riding faster than even their horses. Cities that resist are destroyed. Cities that surrender are spared. Most of the time. Historians still argue whether this reputation strategy was planned or just a handy side effect of efficient warfare. You overhear talk of a tactic used at Nishapur. Once a Mongol general's son-in-law was killed during the siege, Genghis ordered such extreme retaliation that later writers claimed the earth ran red. One fringe tale says every citizen was executed and the city was plowed like a field. Others say that's poetic exaggeration. You decide not to ask too many questions. You notice something else: the soldiers aren't just from Mongolia anymore. Turkic tribes, Persians, even disgruntled Chinese defectors. The Mongol army is swelling into a multinational organism. The rule is simple: serve the Khan, follow the code, and your past can stay buried. This is when you start hearing about Yasa, the great law code of Genghis Khan. Nobody seems to have a written copy, but everyone quotes it like scripture. It forbids theft, adultery, and washing bones in water. It rewards loyalty and innovation. And, confusingly, it punishes urinating in water sources. Makes sense, though. These steppe folks know how to stretch a drop of anything. And here's the kicker. Genghis Khan reportedly banned the killing of animals without permission during hunting season. That's right. The guy who conquered most of Asia had a conservation plan. Historians still debate whether it was about sustainability, social order, or just not wanting his stew pot to go empty. On the lighter side, you spot a Mongol warrior attempting to teach a parrot to say surrender in Persian. It doesn't go well. The bird mostly just shrieks. When the army halts near the Oxus River, you get your first taste of Mongol logistics. The army travels with mobile blacksmiths, medics, and interpreters. There's even a traveling archive scrolls collected from scholars' maps, copied by hand, some wrapped in oiled leather for safekeeping. You realize you're part of an empire that's not just conquering land, but absorbing information like a sponge. One night, a commander explains Mongol philosophy to you over fermented mare's milk. To live free, you must ride far. It sounds poetic until you realize he's also asking if you know how to saddle a second horse. Because Mongol riders switch mounts mid-ride without dismounting. It's like equestrian ballet with blood pressure problems. You also learn that Genghis Khan believed in promoting by merit, not birthright. Soldiers who distinguished themselves were elevated no matter how humble their origins. One officer now leading 10,000 men used to muck stables. You try to remember the last time your boss at the bakery gave you a raise for showing initiative. Then, without warning, the army turns west. The Khwarezmian Shah has fled across the desert. So, what does Genghis do? He splits his army into multiple detachments and sends them through different routes across the Karakum Desert, considered nearly impassable by sane people. Guess who isn't sane? You travel by night, your lips cracking, your water ration a single skin, shared among 5 men. You sleep under your saddle, your ears alert for jackals and ghosts. But you make it, and so do the others. Somehow impossibly, the Mongols converge again, time to strike multiple cities at once. It feels like magic, or logistics with a caffeine addiction. Beneath the stars, Genghis Khan receives reports. He listens, nods, says little. His generals treat him like a storm dressed in furs. He makes one offhand remark about building an empire where merchants can travel safely from one end to the other. You think he's joking. Turns out he's dead serious. But not everything is flawless. Some cities resist harder than expected. Some generals disobey. One fringe tale says Genghis once ordered a commander executed not for failing but for boasting. Humility, it seems, is part of the code. One night, a storyteller joins the fire. He tells a legend that Genghis was born clutching a blood clot. Another says the Khan speaks with wolves and sees omens in the wind. You're not sure which part is true, but neither would surprise you. Later, you see a strange ritual warriors rubbing ashes onto their hands before entering battle. Supposedly, it brings luck or masks scent from enemy dogs. One soldier claims it's good for the skin. That part might be a stretch. The empire grows. And so does the myth. You begin to understand what you're part of, not just a military campaign, but a reshaping of the known world. Cities fall, roads connect. New dialects echo through the camps. And somehow, amid destruction, something new is forming. You fall asleep with the taste of dust in your mouth and dreams of far-off lands in your head. Tomorrow, maybe you'll cross the Caspian Sea, or ride into India, or maybe you'll finally get a clean pair of socks. The sun breaks across the steppes like a thrown spear, and your breath steams in the crisp air as the Mongol host rides westward, this time toward the mysterious lands of Georgia and Armenia. You didn't think it could get stranger than deserts and falcon-wielding commanders, but here you are following the great Khan into the Caucasus Mountains, a place of snow-capped mystery and locals who seem more annoyed than afraid. Genghis Khan doesn't even lead this one himself. Instead, he sends a reconnaissance mission with two of his finest generals, Subutai and Jaibai, names you've come to associate with victories so clean, they feel surgically precise. Their task: scout the terrain, test the defenses, leave a calling card made of sheer, unfiltered terror. You trudge through alpine valleys that smell like pine and peppered meat. Armenian fortresses peer down from cliffs, and Georgian princes try diplomacy, but Mongol scouts are already sketching the roads and counting sheep literally. You realize Mongol reconnaissance isn't just spying, it's data collection down to how many goats graze a hillside. The Battle of the Caucasus unfolds like a classroom demonstration of asymmetrical warfare. The Mongols' fake retreats lure enemies into ravines, then swarm like locusts. Historians still argue whether the speed of these victories was due to superior tactics, better intel, or just the sheer confusion of mountain warfare. Whatever the reason, the locals are left dazed and doubting their life choices. You learn another lesson in Mongol diplomacy: if you're a king or emir, and you submit early, you get a chance at life and maybe even a job. If you resist, well, remember Nishapur. It's not just about survival, it's about getting ahead of the blood curve. And here's a curious twist: the Mongols reportedly carry portable forges. They don't just break swords, they fix them. Each unit has blacksmiths, leather workers, and sometimes even shamans who perform rituals before battle. One warrior claims he can read your fate by watching how your boots wear down. You don't ask what his verdict is on your left foot, it's probably not good. During a brief camp at the edge of the Caspian Sea, the generals send envoys northward into Russ's territory, just to say hi. And by hi, we mean we're mapping your rivers and cataloging your weaknesses. The Russ princes think these visitors are confused traders. They'll regret the hospitality later. But it's not all conquest. You spot Mongol scholars, yes, they exist, documenting languages, borrowing words, and cataloging flora. One scribe is obsessed with Armenian cheese and spends a full week just eating and writing. The army tolerates him because knowledge, especially culinary, is power. There's another unexpected sight: Mongol soldiers praying. Not to one god, but many. Some bow toward the sky, others light incense. Genghis Khan tolerated all religions as long as you didn't get political about it. Shamans rode beside Buddhist Muslims, traded stories with Nestorian Christians, and nobody dared argue theology over breakfast. At least not twice. As the army heads back east, they leave no permanent occupation, just a trail of shattered assumptions and cities rethinking their foreign policy. You hear tales of returning prisoners sketching Mongol tactics from memory just in case they come back. Spoiler alert, they will. One odd relic you carry with you is a Georgian carved horn taken as a keepsake. Another warrior has a Persian astrolabe and insists on checking the stars before every ambush. Superstition, science, and saddle sores ride side by side now. You rejoin the main army deep in Transoxiana. Genghis is older, quieter. Still terrifying, but now he's building something. Roads, relay posts, trade treaties, even a code of conduct for merchants. You overhear that he wants goods to flow from the Pacific to the Mediterranean. You think he's dreaming. But then you see it: caravans from China meeting merchants from the Middle East in a Mongol-controlled market. Gold, silk, spices ideas sloshing across continents like wine in a tilted bowl. The Pax Mongolica hasn't officially begun, but you can feel the silence before it. And here's your strange bedtime tale. During this campaign, Mongols reportedly catapulted diseased bodies over city walls, early biological warfare. Some say this tactic later inspired the spread of plague. Others think it's exaggerated. Either way, you don't go near the catapults. Another joke from the camp: a Mongol and a monk walk into a tavern. The tavern leaves. Okay, not exactly Oscar Wilde, but after 3 weeks of salted yak, anything's funny. You ride past burned cities, but also past ones now thriving under Mongol protection. You see former enemies now serving as local governors, priests, rebuilding temples, and nomads, teaching traders how to ride. This empire isn't just about killing, it's about assimilating, adapting, absorbing. One evening you ride through Bukhara again. A school is being rebuilt with Mongol oversight. The new motto carved above its door: learn quickly, the Khan doesn't wait. You smirk, then ride on. The caravan turns east now. Word has arrived: new enemies gather. Genghis's eldest sons argue about succession. and rumors whisper of lands beyond the Hindu Kush. You don't know what comes next, but you know this: the Mongol tide doesn't retreat. It merely chooses a new direction. Your boots are wearing thin, your horse smells like old socks, and yet the empire rides on. You're now on the long march toward the Indus Valley. Yes, the Mongols are invading what will one day become parts of modern-day Pakistan. Because of course they are. No terrain border or cultural boundary is enough to make Genghis Khan say, maybe tomorrow." This time the target is Multan, a city with golden domes swirling dust markets and a stubborn tendency to resist occupation. You've heard it's hot. Really hot. Like boil your breakfast egg just by leaving it outside hot. Still, the Mongol army advances with practiced ease, bridging rivers and erecting siege works like it's just another Tuesday. The fortress here isn't easily broken. In fact, it's rumored that the defenders pour boiling oil down the walls and have a stockpile of scorpions to throw at attackers. Yes, actual scorpions. Historians still argue whether this is literal or just one of those spicy exaggerations from travel writers trying to impress their sponsors. Either way, you wear your helmet extra tight that day. But Mongols have a special power, patience, and paranoia in equal measure. They build trenches, battering towers, and even engineer makeshift dam systems to control the flow of nearby rivers. Their siege engineers, many recruited from China and Central Asia, run like clockwork. And when the city finally surrenders, it's with a blend of fear, respect, and sheer dehydration. Genghis doesn't always punish the conquered. Sometimes he simply imposes tribute, installs a friendly administrator, and rides on. And sometimes he erases the city from maps entirely. You can't always predict which one you're standing in until the smoke starts rising. The Mongol justice system is a coin toss, and you hope it doesn't land on heads today. As the army rests along the fertile plains, you watch something rare: a Mongol wedding. Bright silks, horse races, a lot of singing, and one drunk warrior who insists that fermented mare's milk is better when aged like wine, despite it tasting like expired yogurt. The bride wears a sash with embroidered wolves, the sacred totem of Genghis's lineage. At night, around the campfires, stories fly like sparks. One claims Genghis Khan is descended from a blue wolf and a white doe. Another says he's immune to arrows. Someone else jokes that his horse is the only thing he's ever kissed. The line between legend and truth grows blurrier the deeper into Asia you ride. You start noticing a peculiar cultural detail: many Mongols wear small leather pouches around their necks. Inside, a bit of soil from their homeland. Some say it protects them, others say it reminds them. But it also means you're traveling with warriors who quite literally carry their roots with them. While crossing rivers, Mongols use inflated animal skins to ferry across supplies. One brave soul even tries to float across while napping. He wakes up 3 miles downstream and insists it was strategic reconnaissance. You're not convinced. But the Indus Valley offers more than new enemies. It offers new ideas. Mongols begin absorbing local knowledge. Indian mathematics, herbal medicine, rumors of flying yogis. One general tries yoga and pulls a muscle so badly he has to command from a litter for a week. You don't laugh. At least not loudly. Here's something else Mongols love: a good census. That's right. The same people who can raise cities in hours also take meticulous records. They list names, skills, family members, and livestock. If you can milk a yak, shoot a bow, or bake decent flatbread, you're documented. Historians still debate whether this obsession with lists came from Genghis's need for control or a secret fondness for bureaucracy. Either way, someone in the empire is always counting something. During a particularly long lull, you learn about postal relays, the YAM system. A kind of medieval FedEx Mongol messengers ride from station to station, swapping horses delivering news across thousands of miles with shocking speed. You're told a message can travel faster than an army. You're also told the penalty for intercepting one is death. So, you don't check the mail. One day, an envoy arrives bearing tribute from the Delhi Sultanate: gold elephants and spices. The elephants seem confused. The Mongols seem unimpressed. One warrior tries to joust with an elephant using a very long stick. It does not go well. He survives barely but gets a new nickname: Dances with Tusks. Later that week, the army begins its withdrawal, not due to defeat, but because Genghis wants to focus on a larger prize: China. The rich, massive, stubborn Chinese states. And so the empire pivots again. Like a snake changing direction mid-slither, it slinks toward the east. But not before leaving a few gifts: forts, outposts, scattered loyalty pacts with local rulers, a few adopted war elephants. The Mongols never just conquer. They build trails of influence like breadcrumbs across continents. You suspect the next army through here will find the roads better than before. As you ride eastward, you think back to Multan, the boiling oil, the scorpions. The fact that even now someone in camp has started brewing tea using a spice he borrowed during the siege. You realize this isn't just war, it's cultural exchange with a battle cry. The journey ahead will be longer, harder, and filled with more silk robes and salted meat than you know what to do with. But for now, your saddle fits just right. Your boots are patched, and your place in this living storm feels oddly secure. Tomorrow you cross into China, and that you've been told is where things get really interesting. By dawn, the terrain beneath your horse's hooves begins to shift again. Dust gives way to mist. Green hills rise in the distance. You squint into the sunrise, and there it is, China. Or rather, its borderlands guarded by outposts that have been peeking nervously westward for years. If the Mongol Empire were a storm cloud, China would be the next town under its shadow. You ride with a column that approaches the western Xia kingdom first. Not as big as the Song dynasty, not as rebellious as the Jin, but stubborn and rich enough to be annoying. The Mongols want access to trade routes. The Xia say no thanks. Genghis takes that personally. So begins another siege. And another. You can't help but notice that Mongols treat war like irrigation: steady, methodical, unstoppable. They'll dig trenches, block rivers, isolate cities. Sometimes they just camp and wait until everyone inside runs out of snacks. You help erect a siege tower out of logs and horsehair rope. One guy suggests decorating it like a dragon, for flair. He's quietly reassigned to latrine duty. This is where you first encounter Chinese firebombs, ceramic grenades filled with gunpowder lime, and a dash of nightmare. When one explodes nearby, it turns the air into metal-tasting smoke. A goat faints. You nearly join it. Historians still argue whether Mongols knew how to make gunpowder at this stage, or if they just borrowed it from their Chinese friends. Either way, you now dream of explosions. But here's something else as violent as Mongols are: they're oddly flexible. They don't just destroy, they assimilate. They hire Chinese engineers, they study Chinese siege manuals. One general learns Mandarin just so he can shout insults with proper grammar. Meanwhile, the yam system stretches farther. New postal stations spring up across Chinese lands. You pass one that's managed entirely by Buddhist monks who moonlight as couriers. They say it helps with meditation. You nod politely, pretending not to notice the pile of undelivered scrolls. In camp, there's a buzz the Jin dynasty is next. Bigger target. More cities. More treasure. You're told they have walls so high they scrape the sky and armies that march in perfect rectangles. Someone bets 10 silver coins that the Mongols will still find a way in. You double it. You've seen what this army can do with a log and a grudge. On the way, you pause in a quiet valley where locals plant rice in shimmering terraces. The Mongols don't raid, they just watch. One soldier says the scene reminds him of home. You realize this isn't just conquest, it's observation. The Mongols don't only conquer lands, they collect knowledge. Still, the Jin dynasty won't make it easy. Their capital, Zhongdu, today's Beijing, is like a fortress married to a labyrinth. Its walls are packed with guards, merchants, and more bureaucracy than even the Mongols can stomach. So, Genghis does what Genghis does, he starves it out. You learn something else during this siege: patience for Mongols as a weapon. While the city trembles behind its gates, the army feasts on stolen grain, trades with local farmers, and hosts wrestling matches. One evening, you watch a match between a giant from the steppes and a wiry archer from the hills. It ends in a draw, and both men are later seen sharing dumplings. Here's a bizarre twist: the Mongols sometimes send performers ahead of invasions. Musicians, storytellers, even puppet shows. The idea: demoralize or confuse the enemy. Historians still argue whether this was psychological warfare or just really aggressive street theater. Eventually, Zhongdu falls. The emperor escapes, but his city doesn't. Smoke coils into the sky like morning silk. The Mongols don't always loot indiscriminately. They target archive scholars, anything that might help them rule better next time. Burning buildings is optional. Stealing knowledge is required. At camp, you share a tent with the scribe who's documenting every move of the army: dates, distances, war songs. He says the great Khan wants history written down, not just shouted over campfires. "We're not barbarians," he mutters, ink staining his fingertips. "We're just in a hurry." That's when the letters arrive. Actual letters. Orders from Genghis Khan to prepare for the next phase, a massive administrative overhaul. Yes, even the guy who conquered half of Asia needs spreadsheets. Suddenly, there's talk of taxation: census rolls, grain quotas. Some warriors groan. Others nod. After all, what's the point of ruling an empire if you don't know how many goats you have? You attend your first tax assessment. It's surprisingly civil. Families present their livestock, farmland, even the number of children. The Mongol clerks jot it all down, then move on. No shouting, no swords, just numbers. One old man tries to declare his dog as a dependent. The clerk shrugs and writes it down. Night falls. You lie back under a canvas awning, staring up at unfamiliar stars. Somewhere beyond the hills, more cities await. More walls, more recipes for dumplings. You think about the Chinese scholar who joined the camp recently. He's been teaching Mongol commanders about Confucian ethics. He also has a pet goose that follows him everywhere. You suspect it's smarter than half the soldiers. The empire is changing, growing, learning. It's not just about raids anymore, it's about governance. Trade routes are being secured, roads widened, languages blended. The Mongol world is expanding into something bigger than conquest. It's turning into a system. And yet, nothing slows. Genghis Khan still rides at the front, relentless. His tent might be adorned with silk now, but his eyes still scan the horizon like a wolf sniffing snow. You dream of retirement, maybe a nice yurt by a lake, but you know better. The empire rides, and so do you. You rise before dawn again. The saddle creaks under you as hooves strike cold earth, and the wind tastes faintly of pine needles and bureaucracy. Because now that the Mongols have a decent chunk of northern China, they've unlocked a new boss level: how to keep it. Conquering cities is one thing. Governing them without burning them to the ground every Tuesday is a much subtler art. Today you're riding with a caravan of translators, tax assessors, and scribes, all dressed in robes more suitable for calligraphy than combat. They trail behind the warriors like awkward shadows, quills tucked into their sleeves like secret daggers. The Mongols have realized something revolutionary paper can conquer just as efficiently as arrows. You pass through former Jin territory. Some cities surrender quietly, others resist, then regret it immediately. The empire doesn't waste time. If a city plays nice, it gets protection postal stations and an official Mongol rubber stamp. If not, it gets flattened into a very quiet field. And yet, you notice the Mongols don't impose their culture on the conquered. They absorb. In fact, one commander proudly wears a Confucian scholar's hat, even though it keeps falling over his eyes in battle. They keep the local administrators mostly because nobody else knows how to run the canal system without flooding half the province. As you pass one such city, a tax collector explains their new policy: merchants are given special passports to encourage trade. No bribes, no checkpoints, just open markets. You stare at the pass. It's made of polished wood engraved with Mongolian script and a stern reminder not to rob the guy carrying it. The Mongols don't just want wealth, they want it to keep flowing. You see the beginnings of what historians later call Pax Mongolica, a weirdly peaceful stretch of time under the rule of history's most terrifying horse enthusiasts. Silk Road traders start popping up again like mushrooms after rain. One merchant swears he traveled from Persia to northern China in a month without being robbed once. You're skeptical until he shows you a receipt written in 4 languages. At night, you camp near a Mongol court in exile, a mobile government on horseback. Picture an entire DMV moving around on camels, and you're not far off. It includes astrologers, cooks, paper pushers, and a man whose only job is to measure how long people bow when the Khan speaks. If it's not respectful enough, they're assigned extra dishwashing duty. Here's something quirky: the Mongols don't believe in fixed capitals. Why build a city when your office can gallop? So their government literally travels with them. Decisions are made in felt tents, law scrolls stored in yak hide satchels. Historians still argue whether this flexibility helped them manage a multi-continental empire or just made council meetings an absolute pain to locate. You overhear a debate one evening around the fire. Should Mongol law replace Chinese law? Should taxes be standardized? Someone proposes making an empire-wide holiday for horse appreciation. It's laughed off, then quietly added to the next draft of imperial policy. Soon after, you meet a man from Bukhara, an Uzbek with a flair for storytelling and strong opinions about dumplings. He's been hired as a cultural advisor, not a spy, not a hostage, an advisor. You realize the empire is becoming multicultural, not just by force but by design. A Persian architect rebuilds bridges. A Chinese engineer redesigns wells. A Korean monk suggests Mongols start bathing more often. He's promoted immediately. There's a curious change in the ranks, too. More officers are wearing silk under their armor. Gold embroidery peeks from under ragged sleeves. You see one warrior checking his reflection in a bronze bowl. Empire chic, he calls it. But Genghis hasn't softened. He still keeps the old warriors close. Still prefers horse milk over wine. Still sleeps on a mat, though now it's a very well-decorated mat with silver trim. He listens to reports about irrigation and plague outbreaks with the same calm expression he used when ordering cities to be erased. Administration to him is just war by other means. Meanwhile, you've been reassigned to observe the printing operations in a newly captured Chinese city. The locals are wary, but the Mongols are unusually respectful. They want the presses to keep running. In fact, they're translating edicts into Mongolian, Chinese, Persian, and sometimes even Tibetan. One press operator jokes he's been printing so much he dreams in reverse ink. You nod sympathetically while helping stack freshly pressed tax notices. The Mongols start regulating weights and measures across cities. You're given a set of official brass weights that supposedly match those from Samarkand to Loyang. You test them at a market stall and watch the vendor's face fall when he realizes he can't cheat with a hollowed-out scale anymore. You give him a consolatory apple. Curiously, Mongols don't like building walls. Not metaphorical ones, not literal ones. While most civilizations think safety means fortifying, the Mongols think walls mean you're hiding. They prefer openness, mobility. So when they take over cities, they often tear down sections of the wall not to destroy, but to remind people that their empire doesn't need barriers. Just roads, lots and lots of roads. You help map one. It stretches from the edge of the old Jia kingdom to the forests of Korea. At each relay station, you're welcomed with fresh horses, hot soup, and if you're lucky, gossip. One relay officer tells you a tale about a Mongol prince falling in love with a Tangut princess who only speaks in riddles. He says it's a metaphor. You think he's just bored. Soon orders come from the Khan's camp, set your sights farther south. The Song dynasty remains independent, powerful, and just out of reach. But Genghis is patient. His empire is growing not just in size, but in cohesion. What began as scattered tribes and turf wars is now an organized, multi-ethnic, efficiently taxed behemoth on horseback. You end your night perched beside a campfire made of pine logs and bureaucratic paperwork that was outdated by lunch. The stars overhead glint like coins tossed into the sky. Tomorrow you'll ride again, this time not to fight, but to survey new roads. Because the Mongols know something vital: if conquest is the muscle, connection is the skeleton. And so you drift off, the scent of pine smoke in your nose, a half-burnt scroll at your feet, and the soft clinking of coins somewhere in the distance. The empire rolls on. Dawn peels itself over the grasslands like a quiet hush. You're already in the saddle again, bundled against the crisp breeze that snakes across the steppes. But this time your route veers westward. Word has spread, Genghis Khan has his eye on the Khwarezmian Empire. And unfortunately for them, they've made some impulsive choices. You arrive at a trading outpost buzzing with travelers, but something is off. Rumors cling to the air like dust, something about murdered merchants, diplomatic envoys executed, and a ruler with the boldness of a cliff and the foresight of a blind goat. Turns out the Shah of Khwarezm decided it was a good idea to seize a Mongol trade caravan and kill its members. Then, just to spice things up, he executed Genghis Khan's ambassadors. Bold. Also fatal. You're summoned to a strategy tent where Genghis listens to reports in silence. One of his generals, Subutai, a man who looks like he can mentally dismantle you with a blink, unrolls a map and taps it. The Khan says little, but his jaw tightens. You can practically hear the wheels of vengeance turning. This isn't war. This is retribution on horseback. When the campaign begins, it unfolds with surgical horror. You cross the Oxus River alongside a force that moves with terrifying precision. The Mongols, masters of steppe warfare, now adapt to desert cities and fortress sieges. Some say Genghis studies maps in the dark by firelight, committing every pass and pathway to memory. Others say he just doesn't sleep. You're not sure which is more unsettling. The assault on the Khwarezmian cities is swift and brutal. Bukhara falls, then Samarkand. You pass through streets still echoing from the clash of swords and screams. Yet it's not mindless destruction. There's a cold logic to the way Mongols dismantle resistance. Surrendered cities are treated with relative mercy. Cities that fight are made into cautionary tales. In Bukhara, a curious moment unfolds. Genghis enters a mosque not to mock it, but to stand where the ruler once did. He declares that he is the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, he says God would not have sent a punishment like me. You look around, half expecting lightning. But instead, there's only silence and the subtle sound of quills scribbling that line into the history books. Quirky detail time. Mongol siegecraft improves with each city. They start recruiting Persian and Chinese engineers people who understand catapults mining and how to collapse walls like poorly made pancakes. One Persian engineer boasts that he can topple any tower if given enough rope vinegar and salt. You give him space, and a goat. One evening, as you rest outside the walls of Nishapur, a fellow scribe tells you a grim joke. Why did the city surrender pause? Because it had a very good memory. Too soon, you think. Then again, gallows humor is probably the only kind surviving out here. You notice the growing complexity of logistics. The Mongols don't just ride fast, they organize fast. Supply lines stretch across deserts with uncanny efficiency. Herds follow armies to provide food. Relays transmit orders across continents. It's like the world's first high-speed courier service, but with more horsehair and fewer awkward customer complaints. Historians still argue whether Genghis's success in Khwarezm was more due to his military brilliance or his opponent's astonishing incompetence. The Shah, instead of defending his cities together, splits his forces like someone trying to juggle porcupines. Eventually, he flees across the desert, pursued relentlessly. Mongol riders hunt him down across mountains and coastlines. He dies alone, probably regretting every diplomatic decision he ever made. Back at camp, a group of generals gather around a charcoal map. You listen in. They speak of targets even farther west, the Caspian Sea, the Caucasus, maybe even the edge of Europe. The Mongol Empire, once a series of steppe squabbles, now stretches from Beijing to the Black Sea. You watch a rider arrive, dust clinging to his cloak. He hands over a sealed pouch. Inside are lists of surrendered towns' inventories and messages from spies in Baghdad. You sip your tea slower than usual. That night, you sleep under a broken section of city wall. A local cat curls beside you as if to say, I lived through this too. You stroke its fur and think about all the cities that once thought themselves invincible. The Mongols, it seems, aren't just warriors. They're myth makers in real time. You remember a moment earlier that day, a soldier whistling a Mongol folk song while sharpening a Persian scimitar. Cultures blend here not just through force, but through necessity. Mongol warriors now wear slippers embroidered by Uzbek women. A general consults a Hindu astrologer before battle. The empire absorbs what it touches and makes it speak Mongolian. In a rare light-hearted moment, a Mongol officer organizes a makeshift wrestling match between troops from different regions. The prize, a Turkish carpet and a goat who refuses to behave. The Persian contender wins, but only because his opponent trips over a broken spearhead. The goat still escapes, but even amid the mayhem, order simmers underneath. Every conquered city is added to the empire's ledger, its roads connected to a larger network. Spies are embedded. Local language is recorded. Mongol officials begin wearing robes adapted to the local heat. One even adopts a Samarkand accent so convincingly you mistake him for a native. Yet the costs are staggering. You ride past towns that exist only in memory. Survivors tell their stories in hushed tones, tales of fire and surrender of families spared or scattered. One old man insists he met Genghis himself. He looked like a statue that might blink, he says. Then he asked if I could cook. The man has been the camp cook ever since. And so you continue west, not just across territory, but into legend. The Mongol Empire is now a rolling, multilingual, tax-collecting, poetry-composing juggernaut. At its center rides a man whose wrath birthed cities of ash and whose vision now bends the continent towards something new, something strange and something astonishingly well organized. You fall asleep on the move again, the camel beneath you rocking like a cradle. The stars above look different this far west, bigger somehow, closer, as if watching the empire grow and wondering what it'll do next. By now, your sense of time has grown soft around the edges. Days and weeks tumble together like laundry left too long in a traveling yurt. You're deeper into the west now, and the landscape rolls with low, dusty hills and the occasional startled goat that refuses to get out of your path. You've begun to understand the rhythm of conquest, the strange pulse of imperial expansion where one city falls, then another, and then another, and someone still has to figure out who's collecting the taxes. Genghis Khan is older now, though you wouldn't know it from the way he still rides ahead of the vanguard. But age doesn't come quietly to men like him. Instead, it brings new obsessions, codifying laws, naming heirs, and, oddly enough, postal systems. You attend a gathering where a lawmaker recites from the newly compiled Yasa, a mix of decrees and tribal customs, so detailed it includes rules for water-sharing horse theft and which direction you should sneeze during a council meeting. Not really. Probably. You're given a pocket-sized version of the Yasa bound in leather and smelling faintly of fermented mare's milk. It's not exactly bedtime reading, but it is surprisingly well organized. One law punishes anyone who refuses to give food to a passing traveler. Another mandates religious tolerance, which sounds progressive until you realize it's mainly to keep the priests from stirring up revolts. You notice something else too. The Khan no longer leads every raid himself. His sons and grandsons now command their own divisions. Yochi the eldest is quiet and tactful, though whispers still follow him questioning whether he's truly Genghis's son. Chagatai is a stickler for rules, but with the warmth of a desert scorpion. Ogade, plump and charming, drinks more than anyone else at camp, but somehow gets things done. Historians still argue whether his charisma or his liver was stronger. You're there when Genghis meets with his generals to discuss succession. It's not an easy conversation. The Mongols respect strength and bloodline in equal parts, but not necessarily in the same people. Factions begin to form. Old warriors grumble that the young ones spend more time polishing their boots than sharpening their blades. You sit quietly scribbling notes and avoiding eye contact. As the army slows its expansion, the empire begins to take root. New roads are paved or at least flattened by many hooves. Supply chains improve. You pass through cities where Mongol administrators now wear silk robes with embroidered step patterns. A man in Tabriz shows you a coin with Mongolian script on one side and Arabic on the other. Two faces, one empire, he jokes. In a strange twist, Mongol control makes trade safer than it's been in decades. Bandits disappear. Caravan routes are guarded. You meet a Venetian merchant who claims he traveled from the Black Sea to the Great Wall without once being extorted. He shows you a ring he bought in Samarkand and a poem he was given in exchange for cheese. You're not sure which is more valuable. Quirky detail Mongol postal stations are so efficient that one general receives a letter just hours after it was dictated across the mountain range. How relays of fresh horses trained couriers in sheer logistical wizardry. You briefly consider stealing a horse and becoming a postal legend. Then you remember how the Yasa punishes theft. You stroke the horse instead. At night, stories grow stranger. One old soldier claims the Khan once survived a lightning strike by growling at the sky. Another swears a ghost warned him of an ambush. Someone else tells a tale of Genghis's horse choosing a campsite and saving the army from a sandstorm. You roll your eyes, but then again, the horse is awfully good at picking spots. One morning, you find yourself at a gathering of poets and astrologers, hosted in a Persian garden recently added to the empire. Flowers bloom in well ordered rows, a fountain murmurs in the background, and someone plays a stringed instrument that might be tuned with chewing gum. Genghis is not present, but his influence is. Scholars debate ethics, astronomy, and whether the Mongols should build observatories. Someone suggests putting a tax on dreams. You suspect he's had too much plum wine. That day, you're introduced to a Tibetan monk, a Chinese mathematician, and a Mongol priest, all arguing politely over the structure of the cosmos. None of them agree, but they all seem thrilled to disagree within the safety of imperial favor. The Mongols, for all their ruthlessness, enjoy collecting knowledge like trophies. And people. Lots of people. The empire is practically a hoarder of cultures, yet the strain shows. The more territory they claim, the more problems they inherit. Plagues flicker through caravan routes. Border skirmishes increase. Mongol governors in faraway provinces begin behaving like small kings. You hear reports of a tax rebellion in the Caucasus, a merchant strike in Bukhara, and a group of Buddhist monks who've started issuing their own coins. Empire building is hard. One afternoon, you spot Genghis sitting alone on a hilltop, watching the sun vanish into a bowl of copper sky. He's not praying, not strategizing, just watching. You wonder what he sees. Not land, not power. Maybe the burden of keeping 1,000 pieces from falling apart. He looks tired for the first time, and older. The next day he falls from his horse. It's not fatal. Not yet. But it rattles everyone. A Khan on the ground is not something the world is ready to process. He recovers mostly, but you sense the turning of a page. Genghis doesn't charge into battles anymore. He delegates. His sons step forward. You see him whisper to Ogedei more often now. Not Yochi, not Chagatai, just Ogedei. At the winter encampment, the decision is made. Ogedei will be the next great Khan. The others accept it, at least outwardly. Behind closed tents, the whispers begin. But you've seen enough dynasties rise and crack to know this is how empires age. You close your eyes that night to the sound of the wind rattling through birch trees. The same wind that once carried the scent of war now smells faintly of bureaucracy and boiled mutton. Change is in the air, and you are right in the middle of it. You wake to the hush of uncertainty, an empire held together by leather cords. Family ties and the lingering shadow of a man who once conquered most of the known world. Genghis Khan is still alive technically, but his hand has grown shakier and the reins of command are now shared, even if unofficially. You wander the camp that morning with a cup of fermented mare's milk that tastes like regret and raw courage, listening to how the mood has shifted. Everyone smiles a little too brightly. Generals slap each other's backs harder than necessary. Messengers walk faster, their scrolls tighter. There's a whiff of transition in the air, and you don't have to be a court astrologer to sense it. Genghis is increasingly surrounded by advisors and priests, including a Taoist sage, who insists the Khan's fate is written in the stars. At dinner, the old man holds up a jade pendant and declares with alarming conviction that the heavens have breathed twice in the past month. You try to look impressed while chewing boiled goat ribs. Historians still argue whether these omens were real exaggerated or just a useful excuse for slowing expansion while everybody caught their breath. This period you'll realize isn't about war, it's about legacy. You're sent on errands now. Not for conquest, but for surveys. You visit cities recently added to the empire, Nishapur Merv Herat. each one a mosaic of soot and silk ashes and architecture. Some have thriving markets, others still smell faintly of conquest. In one bazaar, you're offered a bowl of spiced lentils and a poem in exchange for a story about the great Khan. You invent something flattering and dramatic. It goes over well. The infrastructure work begins to impress you. The Mongol postal system, is more complex than some kingdoms. Relay stations are spaced like clockwork, each with fresh horses, armed guards, and sometimes tea. Letters zip across continents faster than you can ride. You even see a prototype of a message capsule meant to be worn on a falcon. It works until the falcon defects mid-flight to a merchant with better snacks. Administrative centers start to form. You meet scribes from every corner of the empire, Turks, Chinese, Uyghurs, all trained to catalog people, property, and taxes. You sit through a census meeting where 3 translators argue for half an hour over whether a certain village counts as 7 yurts or 6 yurts and a cranky widow. The widow is summoned. She slaps one of them with a ladle. Consensus is reached. One night, you find yourself invited to a debate between a Persian philosopher and a Mongol commander. The topic: can a man be both just and terrifying? The philosopher argues yes. The commander argues who cares? Everyone laughs, but the question lingers. You begin to see a subtle shift in how Mongols present themselves. Once their identity was rooted in speed, chaos, and thunder, now you see official seals, document bags, even wax-stamped decrees. It's bureaucracy, yes, but with a fur hat and a spear tucked nearby. You get the sense they're learning how to govern without constantly torching things. Cultural cross-pollination reaches full bloom. In Samarkand, a Mongol tax collector shows off his new Persian slippers. In Xi'an, a Chinese engineer demonstrates a wind-powered grain mill to a confused Mongol delegation. In Baghdad, you meet a Mongol general who now quotes Arabic poetry at feasts. Not always well, but he means it. You witness a wedding between the daughter of a Mongol noble and a Sogdian prince. There are 3 different musical ensembles, 2 types of ceremonial bread, and 1 runaway horse that briefly upstages the bride. The air smells of incense and diplomacy. You hear people murmuring about the Pax Mongolica, a strange peace built atop conquest. And it's mostly working, for now. But beneath the silk and spices, you sense unease. Some of the generals dislike this new softness. They miss the old days of burning things and shouting. You overhear a man in the bathhouse grumble that paperwork has replaced arrows. He's drying his feet on an imperial decree at the time. As the borders stabilize, trade expands. You meet Italian merchants who have somehow slipped through the web of alliances to sell glass beads and claim they're worth their weight in rubies. You also meet a man who says he's from a place called London and swears his teeth are falling out from bad water. You give him dried kumis and hope for the best. In a stone-walled treasury near Bukhara, you witness the first coins bearing a Mongol ruler's face. This stirs debate. Traditionally, Mongols prefer oral tradition and memory over minted propaganda. But these coins shimmer with authority, bearing inscriptions in Arabic, Chinese, and Mongolian. It's a reminder even empires built on horseback eventually settle into chairs. You're also hearing more about a place called Cathay. Chinese provinces that had once warred with one another now write petitions to the Khan, some requesting his judgment on river rights or marriage disputes. You wonder what it's like to govern lands you've never seen but must somehow rule. It's an empire made not just of earth but of whispers and maps. One night, a caravan arrives with scholars and scrolls from India. You sit beside a Jain monk who tries to explain the concept of nonviolence to a Mongol falconer. The falconer nods politely, then asks whether not killing also applies to ghosts. A spirited conversation follows. Despite all this swirling culture, the Mongol identity stays strong. The steppe remains home. Children are still taught to ride before they walk. Songs about wolves and wind echo through winter camps. And the great Khan, though frailer, still commands attention. His voice is quieter but no less sharp. You watch him correct a general who misquotes a proverb. The general blushes like a schoolboy. Genghis begins to speak more about the afterlife. Not heaven or hell exactly, but something in between fields that stretch forever where old warriors drink together under endless stars. He jokes that if there's no fermented mare's milk there, he'll ride back to complain. You don't laugh, but only because you're not sure he is joking. Then comes the injury. Again, different stories circulate. Some say he fell from a horse during a hunt. Others whisper about an ambush or a wound that never healed properly. Historians still argue whether it was infection accident or just time itself catching up. What's certain is that the man who once rode across the world now rides no more. You're summoned to a closed camp. No torches, no banners. Just a quiet gathering of trusted aides. Genghis lies in his tent surrounded by silence. You don't see him, but you feel the weight of legacy being passed. Instructions are whispered, messages sealed, horses readied, and then word spreads. Genghis Khan has died, but no public mourning, no funeral pyre yet. His death is kept secret for weeks. You're forbidden from saying a word. You travel under cover of night carrying a sealed scroll. People ask where the Khan is. You say planning his next campaign. It's not a lie, not really. You sleep that night on a ridge overlooking the steppe stars thick above you like hammered silver. And for the first time in years, there is no Genghis beneath them. The wind moves differently now. Softer, maybe. Or maybe you're just more aware of it without Genghis Khan's presence to muffle the sky. Either way, you're still traveling, though your path is murkier. The man who once united fractious tribes carved empires with bow and flame and left blood on half the maps in Asia is gone. And the world is expected to pretend he's not. For 40-some days, the Mongol elite managed to conceal the death of the great Khan from the empire and the enemies circling its edges. The official explanation: he's retreating into reflection, which in Mongol speak might mean he's very much dead or just deeply focused on his goat stew. Meanwhile, you keep writing. The scroll you carry is sealed in thick red wax and smells faintly of horse sweat and pine resin. You're told not to read it, which of course means you hold it up to candlelight when no one's watching. You can't see a word, only the outline of something shaped like a tree. Or maybe a family. You're not sure, but it feels important. Behind you, arrangements are underway. A funeral, yes, but more than that, a transfer of gravity. The empire's too big now, too stitched together by marriage blood, and fear for one man to simply exit without ripples. Genghis may be gone, but his descendants are lined up like arrows in a quiver, each with ambition, each with a different map in their head. The mourning begins in secret. No weeping, though. Mongols don't cry for warriors. Instead, they sing low songs and drink bitter liquor, the kind that feels like fire going down and memory going up. You stand among them one night, silent as a stone, watching the torchlight flicker against a curved mountain ridge. That ridge, someone whispers, is where he will lie. They say no one will ever find the tomb. Historians still argue whether it was covered with earth-diverted rivers or protected by soldiers who were then relieved of their duties to keep the location secret. One rumor says they walked horses over the burial site to flatten it. Another says trees were planted that only bloom red once a year. A third insists that wolves still guard the spot, wolves that never die, only pace in circles waiting for their Khan to return. And maybe that's true. You move next into the thick of succession politics. The empire isn't designed for democracy, but it also doesn't entirely run on dictatorship anymore. Genghis had appointed his third son Ogedei as heir, bypassing his hot-tempered eldest Yochi, and ignoring the younger, cleverer Tolui for reasons that remain partly a mystery. Some say Ogedei was the most moderate. Others think he was simply the one Genghis trusted not to burn the world before breakfast. You attend the Kurultai, the Grand Council. It's not one meeting, it's more like a nomadic political rave tents spread for miles. Horses tied in neat lines, nobles, whispering by campfires, merchants selling meat skewers while eavesdropping. Everyone who matters and many who don't shows up. To be absent is to be forgotten. The election isn't quite voting. It's more ritual, more consensus. You witness nobles rise one by one and pour fermented milk into a ceremonial bowl while invoking ancestors. A few drink first just to be sure it hasn't been poisoned. Fair enough. Ogedi is confirmed. There's no cheering, just nods. The quiet sense that a wheel has turned and the axle has held. You're not sure how long it will last? Ogedei is different from his father. Broader, yes. Jollier, surprisingly. You meet him in a yurt hung with Chinese silk and carpets from Persia. He offers you wine laughs at your dusty boots and asks if your horse can sing. You answer yes, and he says good. We need diplomats who exaggerate well. Under Ogedei, things shift again. Less burn, more build. He sees the empire not just as a prize, but as a puzzle to be arranged. Roads are improved. Tax policies streamlined. A capital city Karakoram is envisioned and constructed. It starts as tents grows into stone. You walk the streets one morning and hear Tibetan monks chanting alongside Nestorian Christian prayers. You see a mosque, a Chinese-style pagoda, and a Buddhist shrine all within earshot. It's as if the empire is trying on every hat in the closet and wearing them all at once. Trade explodes. The Silk Road thrives like never before. You share a drink with Venetian merchants and a Tangut spice dealer in the same evening. You meet a Turkish cartographer who insists he's mapped a river that flows backward. You politely pretend to be amazed. Ogedei, to the shock of no one, resumes expansion. Not because he's bloodthirsty, but because borders are so untidy. You're sent west toward Russia and Eastern Europe, where Generals Subutai and Batu lay plans so bold they make your ribs ache. The campaigns are brutal. Not reckless, though. The Mongols now master siege warfare with chilling efficiency. Chinese engineers have taught them how to build trebuchet-scale walls and dig tunnels beneath enemy fortresses. You watch them build a siege engine that looks like a wooden octopus, and then casually collapse a city wall like a sandcastle at low tide. One chilling winter you cross frozen rivers with the Mongol army as they invade Hungary. Yes, the rivers themselves are roads now. You hear ice crack underfoot and think about how terrified any army would be to see horsemen thundering toward them over water. But even during conquest, the machine remains disciplined, logical. Civilians are often spared if they surrender quickly. Cities that resist, well, the less said, the better. One village tries to pretend it doesn't exist by blowing out every torch and hiding in silence. The Mongols find it by following the sound of livestock. In Poland, you see the famous Battle of Legnica unfold. European knights' armor gleaming stand proud, and are flanked in a clever feint that leaves them scattered like wheat before the scythe. Still, one soldier manages to trip a Mongol scout with a wheel of cheese. It doesn't change the battle, but it does become a running joke for months. Yet, just when it seems the Mongols might carve into Western Europe for good, Ogedei dies. Back home, unexpectedly, and everything grinds to a halt. Every general is summoned back. Even Batu, who is halfway through turning Vienna into a vacation home, pivots and begins the long journey east. You follow, barely keeping up. War can wait. The empire cannot move forward without another Kurultai. And so once again, you find yourself among fires and furs, listening to the same song sung for different leaders, wondering whether the next Khan will choose swords or scrolls. You eat cold lamb that night, wrapped in parchment bearing tax records from Persia. Across from you, a Mongol bard is tuning a two-stringed instrument and humming softly. It's peaceful for now. The sun barely makes it through the smoke haze drifting across the steppe as you trudge behind a weary envoy. Word travels fast across the empire, faster than you'd think possible without email, or even pigeons wearing little messenger caps. But when a great Khan dies, the air itself seems to carry the news. You've returned to Karakorum still dizzy from the scale of things. One moment you were watching Europe brace for the wrath of an empire that didn't blink at snow-covered mountains. The next, you're back among silk tents, yak butter lamps, and the low murmur of the powerful planning their next moves over fermented horse milk. Ogeday's death leaves a gap wider than the Eurasian plains. And, unlike his father, he didn't leave behind a clear succession. He'd named his son Gyuyuk as heir, but even that wasn't universally accepted. His widow Toragena Kaitun steps in to rule as regent, one of the most powerful women in Mongol history. And one historian still argue whether she acted out of ambition, necessity, or both. You meet her once briefly. She wears a gown of dark red stitched with symbols you can't quite identify. Her eyes are calm, calculating. You notice she speaks little but listens a lot. People underestimate her. You don't. Tiragin, it turns out, doesn't wait around. She removes ministers she distrusts, replaces them with loyalists, and orchestrates the eventual confirmation of her son as Khan. It takes 5 long years. You watch the slow grind of empire politics unfold like the world's most bureaucratic game of chess. Only every piece has a sword and a suspicious cousin. Gyuyuk is complicated. Intelligent, yes. Capable, perhaps, but short-tempered and suspicious. He doesn't care for Batu, the Western general, still flexing influence and tensions rise like yeast in a baker's yurt. You're sent on several errands between factions carrying sealed scrolls, nodding at the right moments and occasionally pretending you don't speak Mongolian when things get awkward. One morning you pass a courtyard where 2 messengers are arguing over the proper way to pronounce supreme authority in Persian. You pretend to trip and drop your scroll just to end the conversation. Gyuk is enthroned eventually in a ceremony marked by equal parts majesty and mistrust. The Kurultai that installs him feels more like a truce than a coronation. You note the way Batu's allies smile too politely and how the toasts clink louder than they should. And then, with frustrating predictability, Gyuk dies suddenly during a campaign westward, barely a year into his reign. Some whisper poison. Others blame gout. A few say it was divine punishment for disrespecting Batu. One guy claims Gyuk was cursed by a vengeful marmot. You don't know what to believe anymore. Cue another succession scramble. The empire isn't crumbling, but it's certainly wobbling. Like a wagon with the bent axle, it still moves forward, but not smoothly. You find yourself in more than one backroom meeting where powerful figures argue whether the empire should divide, consolidate, or just build a massive wall around everything and nap. Enter Mongol Khan. He's the son of Tolui, the younger brother of Ogeday. He's quiet, intense, and reportedly more interested in astrology and administration than wild expansion. But he's backed by his brother, none other than Hulagu, a name you'll want to remember, and another brother, Kublai, who prefers scrolls to swords but can use both when needed. The Kurultai that selects Monka is controversial. Some argue it was never properly convened. Batu doesn't attend but doesn't object. Meanwhile, rival factions accuse each other of bypassing tradition. Historians still argue whether Munka's appointment was legitimate or a polite coup draped in gold-stitched ceremony. You naturally are in the middle again, assigned to record the minutes of several proceedings where no one officially speaks. Imagine trying to take notes when the conversation is conducted entirely through glances and the occasional grunt. You write down general looks to sky, other general nods. Both drink. And yet Monka is confirmed. Surprisingly, the empire stabilizes. Monka does what few expect. He gets to work, like actual work. Tax reform, census taking, infrastructure repair. You find yourself traveling with Mongol officials conducting population audits in parts of Persia and China. You sleep in yurts one night and brick inns the next. One official insists on measuring every bridge's width. Another complains there aren't enough accountants. You wonder if this is what peace looks like: long meetings and complaints about ledger formatting. Monke is no slouch militarily, though. He sends his brother Hulagu west toward the Islamic world, and the results will be memorable. He also sends Kublai east deeper into China, where another kind of conquest awaits one that involves bureaucrats, scholars, and the occasional mass flaming arrow demonstration. You hear rumors of strange weapons being tested, of maps with new edges, of a giant bronze turtle built to carry an entire mobile library. You choose not to ask. During one night in Karakoram, a storm rolls over the steppe. You sit under a canopy drinking warm arag as lightning flashes far beyond the horizon. An old scribe beside you mutters, "Storms always come before change." You want to laugh, but you don't, because just days later, Munka falls ill. The illness is sudden, brutal, and final. Another Khan down, and now the empire teeters again. But something has changed. Instead of splintering entirely, the empire now functions like a federation of strongholds. You've watched it grow from a warrior's dream into a vast, fragile mechanism powered by trade routes, paper trails, and the fading roar of conquest. Batu rules the Golden Horde in the west. Hulagu controls Persia and beyond. Kublai remains in China halfway between conqueror and philosopher. Each territory is tied to the empire by shared language, custom, and memory, but each is increasingly its own creature. You ride between them still carrying messages, still wearing your increasingly ragged boots, still ducking when politics get tense. One noble you deliver a scroll to is reading Greek philosophy upside down. You say nothing. By the time a new Kurultai is called to determine Munka's successor, it's clear the empire's heart is no longer one but many. The meeting is tense. Factions maneuver. Allegiances realign. Someone brings a goose and insists it's good luck. You're not sure if it's meant to be cooked or consulted. Eventually, Kublai emerges as the next great Khan. It's not unanimous, and it's not without cost. Another rival, Arigboka, contests the title, and the empire inches closer to civil war. But that's a story for another section. For now, you find yourself once more on the road, this time riding east with a caravan carrying silk spices and a stack of letters so thick you have to strap them to a donkey. The wind smells of almonds and pine. The sky opens up like a scroll, and the story continues. The air thickens with smoke and bureaucracy. You've crossed from the steppe into Song Dynasty territory, now the land of tea rituals. Elaborate characters and people who think your Mongolian boots look a bit provincial. Welcome to China, where every war must first pass through a dozen layers of ink. You're traveling with Kublai Khan now, not by choice exactly. You were reassigned after a minor incident involving a spilled ink jar, a misinterpreted poem, and a very confused astrologer. Still, there are worse fates than following Kublai. He's calm, curious, and very fond of asking you riddles while riding through mud. The campaign against the Song dynasty is just beginning, and it's not the fast smash and grab you remember from earlier Mongol conquests. Song China is different. There are fortified cities with deep moats, armies with crossbows, and generals who send decoy troops made of straw stuffed in armor. It's all very clever, and annoyingly resistant to being conquered. Kublai, though, adapts. He builds a network of scholars, translators, and engineers around him. You're not even sure who's in charge anymore. Half the people wear robes, half wear armor, and everyone argues in at least three languages. Kublai studies Chinese administration deeply. He hosts Confucian scholars and Buddhist monks in the same room, watches how they debate without flipping tables, and takes notes. He's trying to build a Mongol-Chinese hybrid government. One day you see him comparing law codes. The next he's practicing calligraphy. Badly. You resist the urge to laugh when he accidentally writes the character for toilet instead of virtue. You assist with document delivery again. The paperwork is endless. There are mandates, decrees, rice ration receipts, and one particularly confusing scroll about the regulation of goose markets in Hangzhou. You start to dream about seals and stamps. Despite the administrative grind, there's real magic in the air. Engineers brought by Kublai construct massive siege towers. Artisans create silk propaganda banners. One inventor insists on developing a flame-throwing chariot. He's banned from the camp after setting his own mustache on fire. Still, there are victories. The Mongols inch forward city by city. There's resistance, brutal at times, but Kublai's forces are patient. They use diplomacy when possible, overwhelming force when needed. You watch a city surrender not to a sword but to a well-organized tax proposal. Then the unthinkable happens: civil war. Arik Boke, Kublai's brother, declares himself Great Khan back in Karakoram. Suddenly Kublai isn't just fighting China, he's fighting his own bloodline. The split tears at the empire's fabric. You hear whispers from every direction. Loyalty oaths, betrayal plots, shifting alliances. Some of your fellow scribes vanish in the night, replaced by new ones with suspiciously similar handwriting. Kublai pulls back from the song front to secure his claim. There are tense councils, frantic letters, and at least one punch thrown over dinner. You watch Kublai's face harden not with cruelty, but with resolve. He knows the dream of a united empire is dying, but he won't let it collapse quietly. You ride with envoys across northern China now. You deliver messages promising peace threats, marriages, bribes, sometimes all in one scroll. One village tries to pay tribute in the form of a massive bronze duck. Kublai keeps it. Eventually, Kublai triumphs. Arikboke is captured. It's not a bloodbath, just a quiet concession. But the damage is done. The empire, once stretching like an unbroken shadow across Asia, is now a patchwork of khanates. Each region retains its Mongol heritage, but the unity Genghis forged in fire is now divided by ambition, geography, and time. Kublai returns to the song front, older and wiser. He adopts the title of Emperor of China and begins to transform his administration in earnest. He moves the capital to Qianbalik, modern-day Beijing, where he builds palaces, gardens, and a postal system so efficient you get jealous. Life at Kublai's court is a strange blend of steppes and silk. One moment you're watching a Mongol wrestler hurl someone into a koi pond, the next, you're attending a tea ceremony with strict bowing instructions. You start carrying both a translation scroll and a change of clothes. Kublai's court attracts travelers from all over the world. Persians, Arabs, Tibetans, and even a certain Venetian family with a teenager named Marco. You meet him briefly. He asks you where the nearest bathroom is, and you point to a pagoda. Later, you find out he's writing a book that will make him famous. You wish you'd charged him a consulting fee. You watch Kublai's rise with quiet awe. He isn't the brutal storm that Genghis was, he's the tide that reshapes the shore over time. But even tides meet limits. The Song dynasty doesn't fall easily. Its capital Hangzhou holds out for years. The final siege is long, methodical, and bitter. Eventually, the Mongols succeed. You enter the city afterward, walking streets littered with torn banners and poetry carved into walls. A child offers you a dumpling, you cry a little, you tell no one. With the conquest of China, complete Kublai rules more people than any man on earth. But power doesn't bring peace. His attempts to invade Japan failed twice thanks to storms the Japanese call kamikaze or divine wind. Historians still argue whether the Mongols ever truly understood why their ships sank, or if they just started blaming moody sea gods. Back in China, rebellions stir. Famine creeps in. Kublai's beloved wife dies and he begins to withdraw. You see him less often now. His beard grows longer. His jokes are rarer. Once you find him staring at a map for hours, he murmurs something you barely catch. Even the sky has borders. You spend your days now archiving. Kublai wants everything recorded: conquests, laws, poems, dreams. You write late into the night by candlelight, copying his decrees and favorite sayings. One scroll reads simply, "The wind does not ask who rides it." You wonder if the empire will endure. It still looks mighty. It still stretches across lands so vast they defy belief. But the old unity is gone. Trade flows, ideas blossom, palaces rise, but the center no longer holds. Still, history is made not just by victories, but by the quiet hands that preserve them. Yours included. You're back in the imperial archives where the dust has its own hierarchy and the scrolls seem to whisper when no one's looking. Kublai is still Emperor Grey, now slower in his movements, but sharp as ever in his thinking. You're one of many now in the great machinery of the Yuan dynasty, but you're still occasionally called upon for special duties: translation, record-keeping, and the occasional awkward poetry critique. Life in Konbalik is both breathtaking and exhausting. The capital has grown into a marvel of bureaucracy and architecture. You walk under soaring gates carved with dragons, past stone lions that glare at pigeons like unpaid tax collectors. The streets bustle with silk-clad merchants, Mongol guards, Chinese scholars, and the occasional giraffe, yes giraffe. One was sent from somewhere far to the west as tribute. It looks as confused as you feel most days. The postal system works so efficiently now that you receive a letter from Persia warning about a possible rebellion 2 days before it actually starts. You're not sure if that makes the rebellion less threatening or more. Kublai's government is nothing if not proactive. You help with tax documentation now. The empire needs coin to function, and coin must be recorded, sorted, and stored. You learn to dread the phrase irregular millet receipts. One local governor reports a shipment of 5,000 bushels of imaginary grain. You assign that report to your colleague and take a long nap. But things are shifting. Kublai is aging. He eats less, smiles less. His counsel grows louder while he grows quieter. The empire that once surged outward now turns inward, concerned with governance infrastructure and holding together what it already has. You sit in on meetings where land reforms are proposed, debated, rejected, reproposed, and then accidentally enacted via clerical error. You suggest a color coding system. It's ignored. A year later, someone else suggests it and is praised as a genius. You sigh and keep writing. Then there's the cultural balancing act. Kublai continues to support Confucian scholars, Taoist priests, and Buddhist monasteries. But not everyone is happy. Some Mongol nobles grumble that their traditions are being diluted. Some Chinese officials whisper that they're ruled by foreigners in borrowed robes. Historians still argue whether Kublai's multicultural policies were visionary or doomed to fracture the state. You attend one memorable banquet where a Confucian philosopher and a Mongol war hero get into an argument over the proper etiquette for soup spoons. It escalates. No one is injured, but several dumplings are thrown. You retrieve one, dust it off, and eat it anyway. The empire's complexity deepens. There are new provinces, new governors, new systems. Kublai implements the Zhongshu Sheng, a central secretariat for administration. You help translate edicts into 3 languages. You marvel at how a sentence about road maintenance sounds poetic in Persian and vaguely threatening in Mongolian. You're also witnessing the rise of paper currency. Kublai standardizes it, promoting the use of government-issued notes. Some people embrace it, others hide their silver under floorboards. One merchant tries to pay his taxes entirely in roasted chestnuts. You reject his payment but accept a small handful, for reasons. The Silk Road buzzes with activity. You hear Venetian traders in Crimea, Chinese alchemists experimenting with gunpowder, and astrologers in Samarkand predicting the fall of empires based on camel sneezes. You quietly note that camel-based prophecy has a surprisingly strong track record. The wealth flows, but so do tensions. Revolts begin to flare in the south, especially among the remnants of the old Song elite. In Yunnan, a governor goes rogue. In the mountains of the southwest, bandits claim divine inspiration and free tea for all. You're sent on a mission to assess the situation. Your report consists of 3 words. It's very complicated. Kublai sends generals. The revolts are put down. But the cracks are spreading. The Yuan dynasty looks sturdy on the outside fortresses, taxes, ambassadors, but you feel the tremors. The nobility grows more factional. The population, especially the Han Chinese majority, grows restless under foreign rule. And then the weather turns. A series of poor harvests hits the countryside. Famine follows. Grain prices skyrocket. People start whispering about omens, comets, earthquakes, plagues. One monk insists that the empire will collapse if Kublai doesn't apologize to a celestial fox. Kublai ignores him. The fox presumably holds a grudge. You visit one village affected by famine. The people there burn incense not for the gods, but to keep rats away from their dwindling food stores. One old woman offers you a poem in exchange for a rice cake. You accept, then leave both with her. Kublai tries to hold it all together. He pushes through reforms. He centralizes tax collection. He improves the Grand Canal for better grain transport. He even attempts another naval expedition to Java this time. It ends predictably in disaster. The ships are battered. The troops fall to disease. The locals resist fiercely. You send a report titled, "We should stop trying to invade tropical islands." And then quietly Kublai begins to fade. He mourns his wife and his heir both gone too soon. He speaks more often of the past, of the steps of his grandfather Genghis, of a time when the world seemed more conquerable. You see him one final time. He's thinner now, wrapped in a thick robe, gazing out over the palace gardens. The plum blossoms have just begun to bloom. He turns to you and says, "Even empires must sleep." He dies not long after. The court goes into mourning. Rituals are performed. Poems are written. Some officials plot succession while pretending to cry. You help compile the annals of his reign, documenting a life that stretched from nomad's tent to imperial throne. And with that, the Yuan dynasty begins its slow descent. You stay in Konbalik for a while, watching new rulers rise and fall. Some are capable, others less so. The bureaucracy thickens, the people grow restless. Eventually, a rebellion led by a Buddhist monk sparks what will become the Ming Dynasty. But that's another bedtime story. For now, you return to your scrolls, your quiet corners, your half-finished translations. You think of Kublai's last words, of the wind across the steppe, of the endless roads you traveled bearing witness to the rise and transformation of one of history's greatest empires, and you rest your head surrounded by ink parchment and the fading echo of hooves on ancient earth. You awaken to a city groaning under the weight of its own grandeur. Khanbalik, once so alive with imperial ambition, now seems unsure whether to roar or whimper. The wind still hums between its tiled rooftops, the lanterns still sway, and the markets still hawk roasted chestnuts and silk scarves. But something has shifted. There's a hollowness at the edges. You can hear it in the footsteps of hurried ministers. You can see it in the eyes of guards who no longer shine their armor. The Yuan dynasty has entered its twilight. The emperors who follow Kublai are, well, let's say they don't exactly win any Emperor of the Century awards. Some reign for a decade, some for a year. One manages to be dethroned twice. Another, rather poetically, is struck by lightning. Historians still argue whether this was divine judgment weather or a particularly vengeful pigeon god. You ever the loyal scribe remain at your desk through it all. You record edicts that contradict previous edicts issued yesterday. You draft tax reforms no one enforces. You translate peace treaties that expire before the ink dries. Your handwriting improves magnificently. Factions fester in the court. Mongol nobles vie for influence. Chinese scholars press for restoration. Eunuchs whisper in corridors. You avoid politics by perfecting your calligraphy and pretending to be asleep during arguments. One time you doze through an entire coup. You wake up and the emperor's changed. You're not even surprised anymore. Outside the palace, things unravel faster. Natural disasters pile up floods, droughts, locusts. Peasants starve while officials host banquets. A bureaucrat gets caught embezzling grain shipments and blames a ghost. Surprisingly, some people believe him. The countryside begins to seethe. Small rebellions sprout like mushrooms after rain. You hear rumors of bandit kings, messianic monks, and secret societies gathering under the full moon. One group paints their faces red and calls themselves the Red Turbans. They quote scripture, demand justice, and burn tax offices. You quietly applaud them. You're reassigned to a provincial city to observe morale. What you observe is despair. The roads are crumbling, the markets half empty, and the temples overrun with people praying for the dynasty's collapse. You file a report that says, things are looking red. Very red. No one laughs. The Red Turban Rebellion swells. At first the court underestimates it. They send generals with fancy armor and terrible maps. The rebels vanish into forests, then return with twice the fury. Soon entire provinces are in open revolt. You're forced to evacuate. Your cart overturns in a muddy field, spilling your scrolls like fallen leaves. You save what you can, wrap it in cloth, and keep walking. Somewhere along the way, a stranger offers you shelter for the night. You trade a story for a bowl of millet. It's a good story about Genghis. He would have hated this era. Eventually, you find yourself back in Khanbalik. But the city's not the same. The court is paranoid. The guards are brutal. Foreign merchants are harassed. The joy has leaked out like steam from a cracked kettle. And then the plague comes. Bubonic, probably. Rats, fleas, panic. You quarantine yourself with a pile of ancient texts and enough rice to last a month. You learn to appreciate quiet coughing fits. The streets empty. The silence howls. When the plague ebbs, the rebellion surges again. The Red Turbans take city after city. One of their generals, a charismatic former monk named Zhu Yuanzhang, begins to rise above the rest. He's ruthless, strategic, and oddly charming. His followers believe he's destined to rule. You know better than to scoff. You've seen destiny before. It usually rides a horse and smells like dried blood. The Yuan court scrambles to stop him. They offer titles, bribes, assassinations. Nothing works. Zhu pushes north unstoppable as the wind across the steppe. Finally, in 1368, the unthinkable happens. Khan Balik is abandoned. The last Yuan emperor flees north to Mongolia, clutching treasures and regrets. The city is taken without a fight. The people cheer. Fireworks go off. You miss it because you're hiding in a cellar copying a map. You emerge to find flags changed, officials changed, but the dumpling stall's still open. The new dynasty, the Ming, establishes its authority with remarkable speed. Temples are rebuilt. Roads are repaired. Taxes are reorganized. Scribes like you are interrogated, then re-employed. You survive by being unimportant. Zhu Yenzhang proclaims himself the Hongwu Emperor. He's ambitious, clever, and deeply suspicious. He rewards loyalty and punishes rumors. One time, a minister coughs during a meeting and is accused of plotting. You learn to hold your breath around high-ranking officials. The Yuan dynasty, for all its splendor, fades into memory. Mongols are pushed back across the Great Wall. Chinese rule is reasserted. The era of foreign emperors ends. And yet, you keep a small box in your study. Inside are a few keepsakes, a coin from Karakoram, a Persian letter praising Kublai, a broken seal bearing Genghis's Tamga. You run your fingers over them sometimes and remember. You remember the vastness of the empire, the stirrup creak of couriers at dawn, the tang of air in the steppes. The moment you first glimpsed Kublai's face, young, ambitious eyes burning with maps and dreams, you survived it all. Empires rose, empires fell, and you wrote it down. The next morning, a new scribe visits your home. Fresh-faced, nervous. They ask about the Yuan court. You smile, offer them tea, and begin. There was a man named Genghis. You're older now, quieter, more content to sit by a window and watch the light shift on rooftops. You still write, but no longer for emperors. Your scrolls are your own now, inked with care and a touch of mischief. And though you wear your years like a worn silk robe, your memory remains sharper than a Mongol saber. Sometimes at night you dream in maps. The Ming dynasty flourishes at least on the surface. You're not a Ming official, heavens no, but you're tolerated, a relic of a prior age. Occasionally you're invited to banquets as a curiosity, a living witness to the Mongol days. You find it amusing. When people ask what the Yuan dynasty was really like, you tell them it smelled like horses and bureaucracy. But the stories aren't over. Far to the north, the remnants of the Mongol royal line regroup. They call themselves the Northern Yuan. They dream of reclaiming China, of restoring the empire. But they are fractured cousins, squabbling over dusty titles, generals, loyal only to themselves. The once mighty Khans now rule windswept grasslands and argue about tents. You keep track of it all through letters and whispers. A courier from Karakoram brings you tales of skirmishes near the Great Wall. One letter reports a bold raid into Ming territory, only to be repelled by lightning storms and confused goats. Historians still argue whether it was a military failure or a farm animal conspiracy. You write it all down, of course. You also spend time reconstructing the great journeys. The Mongol postal routes, once so fast they could outrun a sneeze, now barely function. You draw them anyway, red lines across yellowed parchment. A web of possibility. You annotate them with notes like, Avoid here bandits and bad soup. And then one spring a diplomat from Samarkand visits. He's young too. Polish smells faintly of cinnamon. He's heard rumors of you, the old scribe of Kublai. He wants to know what it was really like. You sit across from him in your courtyard, sip bitter tea, and begin to talk. The words come slowly at first, then in a torrent. The early Mongol councils, the Persian astronomers, the scrolls translated by candlelight. You show him a paper note issued by Kublai's court. He handles it like it might explode. You assure him it won't unless it's a Tuesday. As the diplomat leaves, he bows low and offers you a small silver coin newly minted. You add it to your collection and smile. Coins come and go, empires too. But writing, that endures. Later in your solitude, you think of all the people you've known. The Khan who dreamed of oceans. The tax clerk who claimed to be descended from dragons. The cook who invented soup out of tree bark and misplaced hope. You think of the letters never sent, the scrolls never finished. And one afternoon you begin your final project. A chronicle not for the court, not for posterity, but for the sheer love of it. A record of lives woven through the grand roaring machinery of empire. Not just the khans and generals, but the midwives, messengers, map makers. The lost, the stubborn, the joyful. You call it Whispers of the Horse Lords. You write it in multiple languages. Mongolian, Chinese, Persian. You even include a recipe for onion pancakes. You hope that someday someone will read it and remember not the battles, not the conquests, but the people. Outside, the world keeps turning. Ships leave Ming harbors bound for Java and India. Trade returns to the Silk Road. A new Chinese Admiral Zheng who begins planning an expedition that will rival anything Kublai dreamed of. You hear that his ships are massive floating palaces. Part of you wants to see them. Part of you is content with your ink, your paper, your slowly fading candle. Your neighbors bring you gifts now. Dumplings tea the occasional confused chicken. Children ask for stories. You tell them about the time Genghis Khan mistook a goat for a spy. They laugh. You don't correct them. The world is smaller now. Not physically, of course. But you no longer feel the need to cross every step. You've crossed enough. One day, as the sun sets over the tile roofs of your little home, you place the last scroll in its box, tie it shut with care, and whisper something to the wind. Maybe it's a memory. Maybe it's a goodbye. You wake before dawn. It's quieter than usual. No market chatter, no chickens bickering beneath your window. Just the faint rattle of wind through bamboo slats and the distant cough of someone who's been around even longer than you. You pull on your robe shuffle to the courtyard and stare up at a sky just beginning to soften into lavender. Something feels final, but not in a morbid way. Just settled. Like the last page of a scroll that finally lets go of its story. You sit with your tea, the steam curling like calligraphy. You think of your first ride across the steppe, clinging to a horse that clearly hated you. You remember the day you saw Kublai smile just once like a sunbeam, sneaking through cloud armor. You remember the stargazers of Samarkand, the glassblowers of Bukhara, the papermakers of Hangzhou. The world was vast then. It still is. You just don't feel the need to chase it anymore. By midday, a letter arrives. It's from a scholar in Venice, impossibly far, impossibly curious. He's heard of your work, your age, your memory. He wants to preserve your writings. He uses the word legacy. You chuckle. You once mistook a tax ledger for a songbook. Legacy is a fragile thing. Still, you prepare a package. You choose carefully one scroll of histories, one map, a poem about pickled fish, and a single bronze coin with a hole in the middle. You wrap them in linen and write on the outside for anyone who wants to understand. No grand titles, just that. You ask a friend's son to deliver it. He's young, all elbows and hope. You watch him disappear down the road, and for a brief second you wish you were riding with him. But only a second. You have tea in the slow dance of clouds. The wind carries voices from the next courtyard over. Someone is singing an old Mongol tune badly, but with enthusiasm. It's a song about horses, stars, and extremely confusing romantic metaphors involving yak butter. You hum along anyway. That night you sit by your scrolls. You aren't reading, just being near them. They hum faintly with inked memories the way a harp string might vibrate even when no one's plucking it. You think of all the lives recorded within merchants, warriors, tax collectors who believed in ghosts, musicians who composed songs on dry leaves, lovers who met at crossroads and parted in sandstorms. You've seen so much, but you've also missed things. The Mongol Empire, for all its reach, never truly touched Japan. Its fleets were swallowed by divine winds. You sometimes wonder what that history would have looked like. Historians still argue whether Kublai's plans for Japan were delusion or destiny. You once wrote in a margin. You never resolved the sentence. There are other unresolved things. A page left blank in a scroll because a scribe sneezed and spilled ink. A story you promised a boy in Persia you'd finish but never did. A woman in Chang'an whose eyes you remember better than her name. You accept the fragments, that's what memory is. And perhaps that's what history is too. A puzzle no one completes, only rearranges in increasingly elaborate ways. The moon rises. You realize you're humming again. The same lullaby your mother sang when you were sick with spring fever. You don't know the words anymore, just the rhythm. It's enough. Later, someone knocks on your gate. It's the baker's daughter. She brings you sesame buns and asks for a story. You consider telling her about Genghis Khan's secret burial, how his escort supposedly killed everyone they passed to keep the location hidden. Instead, you tell her about a merchant who once trained a parrot to insult tax collectors in 5 languages. She laughs until she hiccups. You send her home with a scroll of riddles. The stars are unusually bright. You find yourself lying on your back in the courtyard, wrapped in a blanket, staring upward. You trace constellations, one that looks like a bow, another like a goat on stilts. You imagine them as old friends. You whisper to them, "Remember when we rode with empires?" They don't answer, but maybe they blink in agreement. Before you drift off, you think about the next empire. There will always be one. Somewhere, a child is being born who will redraw maps. Another will build roads. Another will burn a library without meaning to. Another will write poems that no one reads for 300 years. And someone always will be there to record it. You hope they have good ink. The final winter comes late that year, but you feel it settling in your bones before the first snowflakes even tumble from the sky. Not painfully, just decisively, like a final paragraph that knows exactly where it belongs. You're slower in the mornings now, and the tea takes longer to steep. You don't mind. People visit more often. They call it respect, but you suspect they're hoping for secrets, lost facts, hidden scrolls, maybe an anecdote about Genghis Khan's bedtime habits. You usually give them the same story, how the great Khan reportedly never removed his boots and sometimes forgot which wife he was supposed to dine with. It's not a lie, it's just not the whole truth. Some days you walk down to the market. It's changed, quieter. The pottery stalls are fewer, the spice vendors less noisy. But the air still smells like roasted barley and wet earth. A boy sells ink sticks shaped like turtles. You buy one just for the absurdity. The boy bows and says he wants to be a historian, too. You nod solemnly and tell him to practice his handwriting first. You stop by the temple. You aren't particularly devout, but the scent of incense is comforting, and the monks don't ask questions. They just nod, smile, and offer you rice porridge. One gives you a charm-painted wood shaped like a horse. You hang it by your door, not for luck, just for company. At night, the dreams get weirder. You dream of riding a cloud across the Mongol steppe, chased by flying scrolls and a hawk who quotes Confucius in a Scottish accent. You wake up confused, amused, and vaguely impressed by your subconscious. One evening, you host a gathering. It's not planned. It starts with one neighbor dropping by with rice cakes, and by nightfall, there are half a dozen people seated on cushions, listening to you describe what it was like to meet Marco Polo. You exaggerate slightly and make him taller, more wide-eyed. You include the bit where he asked if Mongols had ice cream. You leave out the part where he cried when he saw an execution. Some memories are too sharp for soft nights. You remember the details others forget, like how Kublai had a set of drinking cups shaped like different animals and how he'd choose which to use based on his mood. You tell your guests about the time he drank from a frog cup and declared war the next morning. They laugh. You don't mention that the war lasted 6 years. Someone asks what you regret. You think for a while. Maybe not learning the Uyghur script properly. Maybe not keeping in touch with the woman from Chang'an whose laugh once made you drop a scroll into a pond. Maybe eating so much goat stew during one siege that you still dream about it. Regrets, you decide, are just memories with splinters. One of your guests plays a tune on a flute. It's old, haunting, and slightly off-key. You like it better that way. You tap your foot and let the sound float through the air like incense smoke. The sky darkens, lamps flicker. The warmth of body stories and simple food binds everyone together. For a moment, it's like sitting around a campfire on the edge of the world. The next day, you decide to write one last thing. Not a history, not a poem, just a list of things you've learned. You title it What Empires Forget. It includes, no one reads footnotes until it's too late. Empires are better at building roads than understanding dreams. Most secrets are just things people didn't ask about. Horse farts echo more than you'd think. Sometimes peace is just a quiet cup of tea. You leave the scroll open on your desk. That night, you light one extra candle. Not for light, just for presence. You open the window so the breeze can carry the smell of ink into the world. You lie down, pull the blanket to your chin, and smile at the ceiling. Outside, a storm gathers, not violent, just persistent, like a memory coming back. You fall asleep before the first thunder. In your dream, you're riding again through a forest of paper trees, past scholars with flaming eyebrows and camels made of silk. You're young. You're old. You are yourself, exactly as you were and as you are now straddling empires in ordinary days. Back in your home, the candle burns low. The wind flips the scroll to the last line, which reads, "Whoever finds this, write your own ending." And someone will, because history doesn't end. It just waits for the next storyteller. You wake to stillness, the kind that's thicker than silence, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to begin or end. The morning sun spills through the window, drawing golden rectangles across the floor. The scent of candle wax lingers in the room. You lie there a moment longer, blinking at the ceiling, feeling the pull of dreams not quite finished. Outside, the village stirs. Children chase each other between the market stalls. A vendor shouts about sesame buns. Somewhere, someone's rooster is incredibly confused about the time of day. It's ordinary, comfortingly so, and yet you feel something has shifted. You dress slowly, savoring the rhythm of it. The robe over your shoulders. The sash knotted without hurry. The comb through your thinning hair. These motions have become meditation's tiny ceremonies to mark the passage of time. You sit by the window and sip tea, the cup warm against your palms. A knock at the door. It's the scholar from the temple, young, keen-eyed, parchment-stained fingers. He bows and holds out a scroll. You unroll it, eyebrows rising slightly. It's your own writing meticulously copied, annotated even. We've started preserving your records, he says. You've shaped more than you realize. You resist the urge to laugh. Shaped you once misspelled a general's name so badly it caused a diplomatic spat. Still, it's touching. You nod grateful. You offer the scholar a seat. He's too excited to sit. Tell me, he says, what do people never understand about the Mongols? You lean back. You think of the myths, the savagery, the destruction, the endless horseback raids. And then you think of what they built, the trade routes that stitched continents together, the scholars protected under imperial edict, the system of relay posts where a message could travel faster than a rumor. You tell him this. They weren't just warriors, they were editors of borders, of systems, of cultures. They took what existed and rearranged it, sometimes badly, sometimes brilliantly. He writes that down. You pause. Also, they really liked fermented mare's milk. You should write that in bold. He underlines it 3 times. The rest of the day passes with quiet ease. You walk the garden. You nod to the blacksmith. You feed the temple cat who now thinks you belong to her. You pass a girl drawing in the dirt with a stick, sketching a map that probably makes more sense than most official ones. You smile. By sunset, you return home. You light your lamp. The glow is soft flickering. You shuffle through old scrolls, some frayed, some fresh. One contains a half-finished tale about a merchant who disguised himself as a goose. You chuckle. Might as well leave that one for the next generation of historians to puzzle over. Then as the stars arrive, you sit once more to write. Not a record this time, just a memory of a moment long ago, riding across the open steppe, the wind in your face, a sky so wide it made your thoughts feel like whispers. You remember laughing for no reason. You remember believing the empire might last forever. You don't write that part. You just let the ink flow like the wind once did, scattering your story into the evening. And when you're done, you sign it with your name, the simple one. The one you've used all along, hidden beneath titles, nicknames, and bureaucratic spellings. You seal the scroll, place it beside the others, and blow out the lamp. There's nothing left to add. Night thickens like ink spilled across parchment. You lie in bed, the blanket pulled up to your chin, listening to the occasional rustle of wind against the shutters. In the distance, a dog barks, once then goes quiet. The world outside folds into stillness, a hush that feels earned like the land itself is exhaling. Your room is lit only by the orange glow of a dying fire. It casts long shadows that dance lazily on the walls, flickering across familiar objects, your old satchel. A cracked cup, a wooden figurine shaped like a horse. Things that don't matter much except that they do because they were with you through it all. You stretch your legs slow and deliberate and breathe in the scent of warm ash and old scrolls. The sensation carries you backward through every year and every mile you've known. You don't try to organize it. History never really happens in order after all. It stumbles and loops and forgets and remembers when it feels like it. You close your eyes and let the memories wash over you. The first time you saw the great Khan. Not Kublai, not Ogedei, but Genghis himself. You weren't even meant to be there. Just another scribe hovering in the background, trying not to drop your inkstone. And yet you remember the way his voice filled the air, calm, commanding, more thoughtful than anyone expected. You remember wondering, how can someone so quiet cause so much change? Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan was a genius strategist or simply lucky to unite a disjointed confederation of steppe tribes. You suspect it was both. Luck doesn't last that long unless it's wearing armor and riding a warhorse. You roll onto your side, the blanket rustling like dry grass. In your mind, you revisit the old relay posts of the Yam system. The thrill of galloping through nightfall clutching a message meant for someone 3 provinces away. The way messengers were treated like minor gods. One innkeeper offered you an entire goose just for carrying a birthday poem for his cousin. You accepted, of course, you're not a monster. Somewhere in the story, you remember the laughter. The accidental duel with a drunk Persian poet who challenged you over grammar. The Mongol general who swore by a lucky squirrel tooth. The time you mistook a palace servant's wig for a ferret and caused a diplomatic incident. Little things. The kinds of moments that don't make it into official records but matter just the same. You hum a tune you heard in Karakoram once. You don't remember the lyrics, just the shape of the melody, the soft rise and fall like a river humming to itself. You imagine it drifting out through the window, rising up toward the stars, where perhaps if there is any justice, the ghosts of your old companions ride through the sky together. You think about what it means to end. Not die, just end. To stop writing, to close the scroll, to hand the quill to someone else. You've told every story you were meant to, even the messy ones, especially those. You shift again, feel the paper beneath your pillow. Not a scroll, just a note. A reminder to yourself, written years ago. It says, tell them the Mongols were more than war. You smile. Mission accomplished. The fire dies. Your breathing slows. The world fades to a soft whisper of wind and memory and sleep. And you drift with it. The night has folded itself gently around you now. Your breathing slows as if syncing with the rhythm of a distant drum echoing across empty steppe. The memories of galloping horses and whispered treaties fade softly like the last trails of smoke from a spent fire curling up into a starlit sky. You feel the weight of time no longer as a burden, but as a blanket woven from centuries draped gently over your shoulders. The world outside is still. Not silent, just quiet in that deep ancient way. As if the land itself remembers all the lives that passed across it, each hoofbeat, each footstep, each whispered vow. The wind doesn't howl now. It hums like it's singing you to sleep. You think of yurts tucked beneath rolling hills, of the taste of fermented mare's milk on your lips, of a raven perched atop a monument whose name you forgot long ago. You picture Genghis watching a sunrise in perfect silence. Kublai in his grand palace wondering if the empire could truly last forever. You smile at that thought. Not every question needs an answer tonight. Let your muscles release. Let your thoughts tumble backward like leaves in wind. You've traveled across empires, heard voices long quiet, sat through royal councils and fireside tales all without leaving your bed. The story is over for now, but history is patient. It will wait for you to wake. So breathe in, let it all go, and rest. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.